Once or twice a year, we even meet up at the same location to test a batch of bakes, you
Ooh, 38.
Mountain biking is excellent. We test a lot of bikes at Pinkbike. In fact, we try and get our grubby little mitt on just about anything going. And a couple of times a year, we even meet up at the same location to group test a batch of bikes and see how they compare. But as we go into this year's Enduro Bike Field Test, we've got one big question. What is an Enduro bike in 2024 and what should you be able to expect? An Enduro bike, by our definition, is a bike that has around 150 to 180 mil of travel paired to a similar length fork. It's burly, but will get you to the top of just about anything. But bonus points are on offer for those that can climb without making an absolute meal of it. Is an Enduro bike always an Enduro race bike? Well, not really, but those nuances tend to come down to comfort, efficiency, and feel. Some of these bikes aren't race bikes, but they'd be great for the bike park. Maybe as true all-rounders, or perhaps they have some kind of novel design or outlandish geometry figure. And the million-dollar question, or at least it used to be, what wheel size do these bikes have? Well, most bikes in this travel category will have a 29-inch wheel on front. Furthermore, most of them, at least in our group of test bikes, have a 27.5 rear wheel at the back, largely for a bit of clearance. But that's enough waffling on from me. Let's get some of the other tech editors out to hear about some of their likes, dislikes, and preferences when it comes to Enduro bikes.
There was a time when it seemed like it was a race to make the longest and slackest Enduro bike possible. I think that's toned down a little bit. So nowadays we're looking for head angles somewhere between 63 to 64 degrees.
Reach, I don't want anything crazy long. I think for me, for a size large, I'm looking for something that's about 475 mil.
Chainstay length, again, is a personal preference. It's cool to see adjustment if possible, but somewhere in the 440 to 450 range. And then stacks, I really like a high stack, so above 635 is pretty great for me.
Outliers that I really dislike are really long seat tubes. I think it's done. The bicycle industry needs to move on. Short seat tubes with long droppers is the way to go.
When it comes to frame features, I'd say room for full-size water bottle, that's a must-have.
Some of these bikes don't even have water bottles at all, which I think is absolutely daft for an Enduro bike.
Other niceties are in-frame storage. I also prefer a bike that's quiet, so cable routing that doesn't rattle when you're going down the trail. Also, chain slap protection. It's an easy thing to overlook, but for me, quiet bike is super important.
It's nice to have pivots that are easy to service and all the hardware that's accessible. Ideally, there aren't too many proprietary components that you have to fuss with.
I want a bike that is fairly easy to work on, something that I can fix or tighten bolts with a multi-tool.
It's nice if you can change between wheel sizes, but I'd rather have a bike that's executed well with one than compromise trying to do two.
I'm on the lighter side of things for my height, so I prefer a bike that's maybe a little bit softer. I don't want it to be a floppy noodle through the turns, but I also don't want it to rattle my fillings out. So kind of searching for that happy medium.
Want a bike that is comfortable for riding all day long. A bike that's too stiff just chatters through corners, and you can really feel that, especially in the bike park.
I kind of approach this either from stiff frame, soft components, or soft frame, stiff components, or ideally some sort of Goldilocks between those two.
Personally, I prefer something that's a bit tauter and then go softer with my suspension rather than something that feels a bit noodly. That might come back to bite you if you're riding really kind of slippy tech trails, but I hate that feeling of loading up a turn in a bike park and feel like you're going to get spat out the side.
Must-have components on an Enduro bike for me. I want some big, powerful brakes, ideally with big rotors, metallic pads.
Would have to be powerful and fade-free brakes.
And the most powerful brakes that particular brand makes, with the biggest rotors that particular brand makes. This isn't just about power, but it's also about consistency.
200 millimeter dropper post, at least.
They've got to have long droppers for a size large. If it's got below 200 mil, the company's done it wrong.
And I want suspension that's easy to adjust. Doesn't necessarily need to be top of the line, but I do want to have a range of effective adjustments. I don't want to see tires that are undergunned, so whether that's a tread pattern that's not aggressive enough, rubber compound that's not sticky enough, thin sidewalls, one thing that I would switch immediately. I also want to see longer dropper posts. So if a bike comes with a dropper post that's too short, that's going to get a ding for me.
I mean, there are 200 mil plus dropper posts in existence, so spec those accordingly for the size.
Also, through headset cable routing, that's something that I just don't want to see on really any bike, but especially enduro bikes, we might need to do some servicing. It's going to sound something like a cliche, but my ideal suspension characteristics are to be nice and supple off the top, good mid-stroke support, then a nice amount of bottom-out resistance without being too harsh.
I prefer something a little more linear where I can let the tires do the work if it's a little bit slippery, whereas something that's too progressive I find can lead to spiking where you're blowing through the travel and hitting that progression wall way too late in the travel.
For suspension, I'm not somebody that likes a really progressive setup. I'd have something more consistent any day of the week. When it comes to tracking or smooth off the top, that's not necessarily my primary concern. I'd rather have something, personally for me, that has got quite a low value of anti-squat, so it's nice and grippy on the climbs when you're pedaling, and quite a high value of anti-rise. I like something that sinks into the stroke when you get on the brakes and stops that mass transfer pivoting into your hands.
I like a bike with a pretty soft top end for good grip and kind of like a compliant feel that you can pump into, but then ramps up into a nice supportive mid-stroke and smoothly then into the end stroke. I don't really love a bike that's crazy progressive, but I do like a bike with some progression just because it gives you that kind of poppy, supportive feel.
So that's what we think an enduro bike should be going into 2024, and largely some of the figures that we'll be comparing this current crop of bikes to. But that's it for us today. We're now going to go get into a fist fight over a game of Monopoly. Thanks, guys.